Lewis Goodall of the Newsagents and of his own programme on Sundays here on LBC is with me in the studio. We thought we'd nobble you for a bit of a political review, Lewis.
Oh, go on then.
Where do we begin?
Well, it is the season, isn't it,
It is the season to be jolly.
Yeah, well, I don't know about that. We'll see.
Well, I think I want to start with, apologies to the government, I want to start with the Labour government's fairly regular foot-in-mouth disease that they seem to have had. I mean, they'd been, 6 months in power by the beginning of this year?
Yes.
It didn't really get any better, did it, in terms of foot-in-mouth?
No, I don't think it did. I think that if, in a way, I think that the shadow of both the kind of semi-emergency budget that they did not long after coming in with pensioner credit and pensioner winter fuel allowance and so on, sort of hung over the first part of the year. And then the most recent budget hung over the sort of second part of the year, and they didn't really manage to escape either. And I think if you were trying to communicate or trying to sort of sum up a political theme for the government for this year, it has been that consistently, no matter that they feel, and they've probably got some justification for this, that they feel that in various areas they're making progress. Yes, they had a terrible inheritance on different policy programmes. They're making headway. They have not at any point, I think, been in control of the political conversation. No. Which is unusual for a government, and unusual for a government which is still so young. I mean, I've reflected a few times, Sheila, that it's almost felt like year 7 or year 8 of the government.
Yeah, well, I keep thinking of things like the welfare defeat.
Yes.
Was that this year or last year? It was very much this year.
Very much so. Yeah. And I think, part of that is that political time has sped up. I think it's fair to say, sort of political time these days, a bit like dog years, and so governments which are younger and prime ministers who have been in office less time feel sort of more wearied and sort of worn than perhaps they would have done before. But part of it, I think, is their inability to control or to even often direct that conversation. Part of that comes from Starmer's own lack of communication abilities. Part of it comes from the fact that he is singularly uninterested in communicating or interested in political ideas. He is a technocratic figure, which means that within politics, Sheila, politics fundamentally is a battle of ideas. It's a contestation of ideas. Ideas are used as political weapons for politicians. And very often, Keir Starmer, as a result of appearing to have few or no ideas, has no weapon to brandish in the political arena. And others do. And we are seeing fill that vacuum figures like Nigel Farage, people even like Elon Musk, others. And so it gives the government, I think, fairly or unfairly, a sense of drift and listlessness.
That's a really good point about the ideas versus the no ideas type, because all he's got as a leader to brandish then
is competence.
Competence and results.
And competence and results are a hostage to fortune. Absolutely. Because if you anchor, and this was always going to be a weakness of the Starmer government, if you anchor your politics in a politics of technocracy, of managerialism, of competence, the moment you're not, and that is completely inevitable, by the way, because government is just too complicated, too massive, spends too much money not to make mistakes and not to sometimes be incompetent. And as well, if you're the Prime Minister, largely you have very little control over that, because some civil servant screws up. Look what happened with the Afghan data leak, for example. Some civil servant sends an email before you know where you are, write you 7 billion quid down, you lost 20,000 people's details who might be killed by the Taliban. You've got no control over that as Prime Minister, but you're responsible for it. Yeah. So as soon as you anchor your politics in the politics of managerialism, then you are, I think, a hostage to fortune. Because when governments with a stronger sense of their own intellectual momentum and what they're about, what they have, which is a strength, if you think about Thatcher or Blair, to some extent even Cameron, to some extent in the early days even Johnson, what they have is something to fall back on. When everything is falling around them, they have ideas, they have a sense of what they're about, which anchors them politically. Starmer hasn't had that.
And on that, the leadership and the technocratic style of it, this was something, we have to think about what might come early next year on leadership bids.
Indeed.
Against
and it's
him.
interesting that some of the potential heirs apparent are talking exactly that language, not just me talking about technocracy.
Streeting did in that new statement interview,
explicitly said it and basically offered the critique that I just had, but that's pretty extraordinary when you consider that he's a cabinet minister.
Yeah, and too managerial, too technocratic, yes. No story, no narrative.
Yes.
And he's actually he can be a bit, like scattergun, can't he, with his speech, Streeting sometimes, but he can certainly represent their achievements quite fluently.
I think he's probably the cabinet's best communicator. I mean, one of those little moments, which I think shows the the difference in politics in 2025 by comparison to even relatively recently. It was the moment that Streeting basically decided to go on the attack after he had been briefed against, which clearly by number 10 by someone, only a few weeks ago. And that was a classic Westminster manoeuvre, right? Like that is what classic comms, Westminster comms, you brief against someone, then they have to respond to it, and then they're sunk. Well, what Streeting did and epitomised well is that we have moved from that sort of comms era of the 1990s and 2000s into the sort of content era of the 2020s. Because what did he do? He went on the television under his own steam. He was due to be on anyway.
Laughed at them.
He laughed at them. And he used a reference to Joe Marler and the Traitors, which lit up the internet. And he won. And he was strengthened, and those briefing against him, and by extension, number 10,
and in the New
Statesman
Statesman interview, you called it a drive-by.
Yes, exactly.
And shooting, but he said
so there was a politician, whatever his demerits, whatever his faults, understanding the kind of way that the politics, media, digital life intersects in a way that number 10 has rarely done. Although I do note that number 10 have, in the last few weeks, I think, been more alive to this idea, because you see Starmer turning up on, and I suppose I would have an ulterior motive in this, but on podcasts, in new media, trying to do more content, quote unquote.
Loose women.
They're loose women. They're making changes to the lobby system and so on. Now, whether that is enough, whether Starmer can navigate that, given that he is quite a sort of vibeless figure in a lot of ways, I don't know. But it is interesting. They're clearly changing tack under the new comms director at number 10, Tim Allen.
And while we're on potential leadership challenges, Shabana Mahmood, the newish Home Secretary, she's made something of a mark early on, hasn't she, in that role?
She has. It's been an interesting year for her. I think that's fair to say. She's been, coming in as Home Secretary, didn't expect to become a Home Secretary in that reshuffle again, sort of quite a big moment in the political year, but one we sort of quickly plays over. I think though for her, look, I think she's had a strong start, certainly on the communication side. I think in 2026, of course, the big metric for her, and it's the metric she has set herself, is of course small boats, and whether small boats substantially reduce in number, not just come down a little bit, but substantially reduce in number. And I think if you talk to people in the Home Office and talk to people around government, there is a fear that perhaps she has set that in creating that impression that she might be able to do that in talking tough game, with a lot of support from the right-wing newspapers, who, by the way, are as much as anything talking her up to potentially knock her down. Now, she knows all this. She's a very clever and wily and astute politician, so I'm not saying anything she wouldn't already be aware of. But that is a potential sort of problem for her in 2026, because she has very explicitly, just as Keir Starmer did, again, this is a sort of thing that sort of ties them together. Keir Starmer in his conference speech explicitly made politics about defeating Nigel Farage. That's the metric that he set himself in that conference speech. He has spent, and it's an interesting strategic decision, again, that they didn't have to make. At the start of the year, they've started to do this. They basically said politics in the next general election, which is, of course, unknowable and still a long way away, the contours of that election are still unknowable, but he said the next general election will be fought between us and Reform. The Conservatives basically saying, dead. The Reform Party also agree, because they've also got an interest, obviously, in saying that. But in doing that, he has set that metric as basically the success of what this government is about. Not anything this government is doing, it's a political test. And that's potentially dangerous for him, because obviously when we get to the May elections, if Labour does catastrophically badly and Reform does well, then his MPs can quite legitimately say, Keir Starmer, you said that the test of politics was defeating this hard-right potential government. And right now it looks like they're on course to win. So by your own logic, ought we not to get rid of you? And
before I move on to some of the other parties, just a final word on that. If you look at just the two names, and there will, I imagine, be more than two names when a leadership bid eventually comes, or a leadership challenge eventually comes, both of the two names we've spoken about, Streeting and Shabana Mahmood, I would argue both streets ahead in terms of taking on Nigel Farage compared to him in communication strategy, at least.
Potentially. I mean, obviously, with the other name that we can't discount, of course, is Angela Rayner, who is now, I mean, again, another big story of the year, and a big fundamental change to the calculus, or to the sort of alchemy of the government in a way, because obviously
she could
potentially. I mean, while she was in the government as Deputy Prime Minister, she was inside the tent. And in a weird sort of way, although obviously it was deeply embarrassing for her to lose the position that she had to resign as a result of that scandal, if that's the right word, then the weird sort of flip side to it is that, in a weird sort of way, politically speaking, she has some premium at being outside of the government now. Given the government's unpopularity, she can sort of take some of the best of having been part of it, and she wasn't disloyal, she was just had to leave. But she can also sort of try and put some distance, as indeed exactly, in a way, what happened with Lucy Powell when she replaced Angela Rayner, because she had recently been ejected from the government by Keir Starmer, one of the only sackings that he made in that reshuffle. A few weeks later, she turns up as deputy leader. I'm back. Hey, Keir, how you doing?
How's it hanging?
Yeah.
Kemi Badenoch, apologies to her. She
doesn't like that, Sheila. She doesn't like being called Badenoch.
Fogarty.
Exactly,
I've lived my life with it. I know what she means.
I get Good Hall a lot.
Oh, do you? Good Hall. Good Hall.
I got Food Hall once, which was an interesting one.
I can top that.
Go on.
Jean Frobisher. Somebody addressed a letter to me at university all those years ago. I know.
That's just
Jean Frobisher.
Are you sure you just weren't taking Jean's post? Sheila.
It was written on a letter to me.
It's not your post, leave it. It was Jean's.
I think somebody misunderstood me on the phone when I gave my name.
Wow.
But I think I would love to be called Jean Frobisher.
That's a
Can you
cool name,
imagine
innit?
what she'd
That
be
is
like?
Cool. It's a good novel. Well, you probably have a good idea because you were reading her post.
I think I'm going well off here. Jean Frobisher would be...
If you're out there, Jean, Sheila's still got a few letters for you.
She's a minor character who knows everything in an Agatha Christie book.
I think she does sound like that. She sounds like a novel.
Jean, she's dressed head to toe in tweed.
Yes,
and has a little dog in her handbag.
Sounds lovely.
I like
She sounds like she could be a Classic FM presenter, actually. Classic FM at lunchtime.
They're getting quite trendy now, Classic FM.
Well, hey, let's not advertise the competition.
Well, welcome to Dorno Porter, who's a new recruit to Classic FM. She'll be fabulous. Anyway, that is not the political review of the year, is it? Kemi Badenoch, she has warmed to the task, has she not?
She has. Look, I mean, Badenoch, again, I think it's fair to say, we just talked about Keir Starmer's conference speech, that stabilised his political position briefly. I think it's fair to say that Badenoch's conference speech has stabilised her position more generally, and at least for the time being. As recently as that, people were saying, Jenrick's on the rise, she's going to be removed as soon as the sort of it was possible to challenge her. No one's really talking about that now.
She's quick on her feet in the Commons,
I think for a few reasons. She's improved at Prime Minister's questions. People belittle Prime Minister's questions. It is ridiculous in lots of ways, but it is important in terms of, if you have a good run at it, it does give some cheer to your MPs. If you're having a bad run of it, it makes your MPs feel that little bit more mutinous. So she's had a good run of it. She's gained confidence in the Commons. She regularly beats Starmer in it. Starmer is not that brilliant at it, so it's not that hard, but nonetheless, she's got some more confidence in that. I think it's widely accepted that she had a sort of good budget period as well. She, and also they've scored some wins. They did drive the charge against Rayner. There have been other things as well, which, when you consider how small their numbers are in the Commons, is no small thing. So I think they've got into the groove of being in opposition. It's a huge psychological shock going from the government to being in opposition. Yeah. You have the whole literal means of the British state at your disposal, and then suddenly it's just you in a room with a couple of researchers having to go up against the might of the government of the day. And they've got used to it.
And that election defeat wasn't just an election defeat.
No, it was an absolute drubbing. The other thing that I think has gone in her favour is that the conversation in the political autumn has been more about the economy, partly because of the budget. And a weird thing in a way, I think, if we'd been having this conversation at the end of 2022 after the kind of Liz Truss debacle, I think we would have said with some confidence at that time that could well have been the kind of end of the Tories' reputation for economic management for a generation, just as Black Wednesday was for the Tories in 1992 or 2008 financial crisis was for Labour in 2008. It hasn't been. No. For whatever reason, maybe it's because the Tories moved so quickly to remove Truss and they sort of were seen to cauterise the wound, and Sunak was seen as a more sort of competent manager of the economy. I don't know, but in terms of all the polling, at least, actually the Tories' reputation on the economy sort of survived that and has burnished since the election, and Labour's own reputation for it, fairly or unfairly, has declined. Yeah. So when the conversation is about the economy and not about immigration, then the Tories do better in a weird sort of way. Actually, one of the things for 2026, we just mentioned Shabana Mahmood. The weird thing, there is actually a very quiet alliance in the sense it is both in Labour's interest and in the Tories' interest for her to shut down the small boats issue and be seen to get immigration, both irregular and regular, under control. Why? Because as long as it's perceived as to be disorderly and out of control, legal and illegal, then the conversation is about immigration, which is terrible for Labour because they're in government now, and it's terrible for the Tories because they were perceived to have failed so catastrophically on it, and great for reform. So Kemi Badenoch will be quietly hoping in 2026 that Shabana Mahmood succeeds.
And with apologies to the various multifarious political parties we haven't mentioned yet, a word on Ed Davey and the Lib Dems. Seems to me what they've been pushing most this year is go on, you want to, customs union, single market, do it.
Yeah, I think again the Lib Dems have had a decent year. Their polling position has not sort of significantly improved, but it's not doing too badly. And I think you go behind it to them. They are very good. Again, talking about being good at opposition, they're very good at just finding those little things that get them attention. And they have been unrelenting, in particular, about Trump and putting the government under pressure in terms of its relationship with Trump. They are the people who are allowed to be, have got the license to be, most critical about Trump in British politics. And the other force we should mention, of course, is Zach Polanski in the Green Party, who, were nowhere at the start of the year, I think it's fair to say. Whether you like Polanski or dislike him, there's no doubt he has inserted the Green Party into the political conversation that we were talking about at the start in a vital way that, has not been the case for the Green Party before. Question, of course, about whether he can sustain that momentum in 2026. But, there'll be, look, for a start, all of the, something I'd keep an eye on with that is that the London Borough Council elections are up in May, along with a suite of other big elections. The Greens will be hoping to do very well, and I expect they will do very well, particularly in the kind of inner London boroughs, which have been Labour strongholds for a long time.
And the left is sort of rattling at the moment, isn't it, in politics? There's room for change there. There's definitely.
Well, there was clearly at the start of the year, there was some big open political space on the left. It was obvious someone was going to take it. It was in the end clear it was going to be Jeremy Corbyn, Zara Sultana or Zach Polanski. It's clear, I think, who's won that battle.
It certainly is. Thank you very much indeed, Lewis Goodall, host of the Newsagents podcast. Don't forget, latest episode drops at 5 today. Thank you for all your contributions to the programme this year.
Well, it's my pleasure.
Always
it's our little confessional booth.
Always
and I look forward to many more in 2026.
Mr. Goodall and Jean Frobisher.
Food hall.
Food hall.
Food hall.
Jean Frobisher. Yeah.